The city skyline stretched endlessly outside the CEO's office window, a shimmering expanse of power and ambition. Behind a sleek mahogany desk, the person who had built an empire sat in silence, tapping a single report against the polished surface. The numbers were steady, the profit margins healthy. On paper, the company was thriving. But something wasn't right. The reports had started trickling in months ago, small complaints at first. A customer had a negative experience. An employee quit unexpectedly, citing poor management. Then the complaints multiplied. Anonymous employee surveys revealed troubling patterns, mistrust in leadership, a toxic work environment, and managers who ruled with intimidation instead of guidance. It was easy to dismiss these as isolated incidents, but a recent leaked memo had changed everything. The document detailed widespread dysfunction in the company's frontline operations. Stores were understaffed, customer service was declining, and employees described feeling invisible to the corporate machine. The CEO had built this company from nothing, pouring years of sacrifice into its success. They had once known every employee by name, had stood behind the counters themselves, had believed in the mission of providing a workplace where people thrived. But the company had grown, expanded, and with that growth came distance. Too many layers of management stood between the CEO and the people on the ground. The board reassured them that turnover was normal, that minor customer service failings were the cost of doing business at scale. But in the pit of their stomach, the CEO felt something deeper, an erosion of the very values that had built their success. There was only one way to know the truth. The plan came together quickly. With the help of a trusted confidant, an old friend with experience in disguise and professional transformations, the CEO shed the image the world recognized. The tailored suits were replaced with worn-out jeans, a faded polo shirt, and scuffed sneakers. A slightly heavier build, achieved with subtle padding, made them look different enough. The crisp haircut was swapped for something slightly disheveled, and a pair of glasses completed the look. No one would see a powerful CEO now. They would see an average, middle-aged worker looking for a job. The job application process was illuminating in itself. Online, the company advertised a commitment to employee satisfaction, but the reality was starkly different. The automated hiring portal was cold, impersonal. No one followed up for days. When a store manager finally called, their tone was rushed, almost indifferent, as if filling the position was an inconvenience rather than an opportunity. The CEO sat through the phone interview in their modest rented apartment, a far cry from their usual high-rise suite, listening to the uninspired questions. No one asked about long-term career goals or growth potential. Just availability, willingness to do extra shifts, and a vague mention of learning on the go, instead of structured training. The following week, they arrived at one of the company's busiest locations for their first shift. The store was a stark contrast to the glossy marketing campaigns that adorned corporate presentations. The walls were lined with worn-out posters boasting values that no one seemed to embody. Customers moved through the aisles with bored efficiency, the atmosphere lacking any sense of warmth. Behind the counter, employees moved at an exhausting pace, their faces tight with fatigue. No one looked up when the CEO entered. The store manager, a stocky man with a permanent scowl, barely acknowledged them. "New guy," he grunted, scanning them up and down. They nodded. "Name?" The CEO gave their fabricated alias. "Follow me." No time for chit-chat. There was no welcome, no onboarding process, just a curt wave toward the back room. Inside, shelves were stacked haphazardly, boxes piled up with no discernible order. The air was thick with the scent of cardboard and stale coffee. Another employee, a wiry young man with tired eyes, glanced up from restocking. "Show him the ropes," the manager ordered, already walking away. The young man sighed and handed over a scanner. "Just scan the barcodes, count the items, and put them where they go. If you mess up, it's your problem." With that, he turned back to his own task. The CEO worked in silence, absorbing everything. The chaos, the lack of direction, the way employees barely spoke unless necessary. It was nothing like the company they had envisioned years ago. Break time offered no respite. The cramped break room had a flickering light overhead, its walls lined with outdated notices. A vending machine hummed in the corner, half its buttons marked with an out-of-order sign. A few employees sat around the scratch table, scrolling through their phones, their conversations muted. Determined to blend in, the CEO settled into a chair, but no one made an effort to engage. It wasn't hostility, it was detachment, the kind that came from knowing connections here were temporary. Then came the moment that changed everything. Later that evening, struggling with a tricky task at the register, the CEO turned to a veteran employee, a man in his late 40s with a hardened expression. "Hey, can you help me with this?" The man barely looked up. "Figure it out yourself." The words were casual, dismissive, but they struck deep. The CEO had built this company believing it was a place where employees supported each other, where hard work was rewarded and respect was the foundation. But here, right in front of them, was a culture so far removed from that vision that it felt like standing in a stranger's creation. As the shift dragged on, reality became undeniable. Employees weren't just overworked, they were disillusioned. The company wasn't failing in profit, but it was failing in something far worse. It was failing its people. And for the first time in years, the CEO wasn't watching from the top. They were living it, and they weren't sure if they could fix it. The relentless beeping of the scanner filled the air, a monotonous rhythm that seemed to mirror the lifeless energy of the store. The CEO, still concealed in their new identity, moved through the aisles, taking in every detail with quiet scrutiny. Every corner of the store held an unspoken truth: understaffed shifts, overworked employees, and a management team that seemed to exist solely to enforce rules rather than support their team. The carefully curated corporate vision of an efficient, customer-friendly environment was nowhere to be found. It didn't take long to realize that many of the employees weren't just exhausted. They were disengaged. Transactions were handled with robotic indifference. Shelves were stocked with a carelessness that came from repetition rather than pride. And customers who had questions often waited too long for an answer that wasn't helpful. The air in the store carried something heavier than fatigue: resentment. The workers here weren't thriving. They were surviving. One of them stood out. Elena had been at the company for over 6 years, something she mentioned only after a passing comment about how nothing ever changes around here. She was sharp, efficient, and quick-witted, but her movements carried the weight of someone who had learned not to expect too much. She had seen countless new hires come and go, and she didn't bother investing in anyone who wouldn't last. "Listen, just do your job, keep your head down, and don't expect much," she muttered during a lull in customers, tapping her fingers absently against the counter. "Management doesn't care about us. You think they ever step foot in here? We're numbers on a spreadsheet to them." The CEO bit back the urge to argue. The instinct to defend their own leadership was strong, but right now, they weren't the boss. They were just another worker in the trenches. "But if they don't care, why do you stay?" The question slipped out before they could stop it. Elena gave a humorless laugh. "Health insurance. Bills. A paycheck, even if it's not great." She glanced around before lowering her voice. "Not like we have a union or anything. They make sure we don't." It was a jarring moment, one that made the CEO's stomach tighten. They had never opposed worker representation, yet here was a direct contradiction to the values they had believed were in place. How much control had been lost over the years? How many decisions had been made in the name of efficiency rather than fairness? The next few days were filled with more revelations, each more unsettling than the last. Employees weren't given proper breaks because shifts were stretched too thin. Supplies often ran low because cost-cutting initiatives had slashed inventory orders. The security cameras weren't just for theft prevention, they were used to monitor employee productivity, a fact that made everyone uneasy. Worst of all was the store's manager, Travis. Travis was the kind of leader who wielded authority like a weapon rather than a responsibility. He barked orders instead of offering guidance, ignored complaints, and made it clear that he saw the employees as replaceable. He spoke to them in clipped tones, barely masking his impatience when they asked for help. The CEO watched as he dismissed concerns about understaffing with a shrug, waved off customer complaints with an eye roll, and made a habit of disappearing into his office when things got hectic. When an elderly customer struggled with the self-checkout machine, the CEO instinctively stepped forward to assist, only to be yanked back by Travis's firm grip on their arm. "Not your job," he muttered. "If they can't figure it out, that's their problem." The CEO's pulse quickened with anger, but they forced a neutral expression. "Shouldn't we be helping customers?" Travis scoffed. "We don't get paid extra for being nice." The words settled into their chest like a stone. That night, as they sat in their small rented apartment, the weight of what they had seen pressed heavily upon them. This wasn't the company they had built. It wasn't even close. The culture had rotted from the inside, layer by layer, until it was something unrecognizable. And the worst part? No one in corporate seemed to know or care. The employees had learned not to expect fairness. The managers had stopped leading. The customers had stopped believing in the company's promise of service. It wasn't a failing store. It was a failing system. And the CEO wasn't sure if it could be saved. The morning air inside the store was thick with the usual mix of coffee, stale air conditioning, and quiet resentment. The CEO, still in disguise, moved through the motions with an almost mechanical precision. Each shift felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the truths that had settled deep into their bones. The workers had given up on change. Management had abandoned leadership. And corporate, corporate, had let it all happen. Then came the moment that shattered whatever restraints still held them back. It started with a customer, an older woman struggling with a bulky bag of groceries at the self-checkout. She fumbled, her hands unsteady, the machine flashing an error message that she clearly didn't understand. The CEO instinctively stepped forward, reaching out to assist. A sharp voice cut through the air. "Leave it. She'll figure it out, or she won't." Travis. His expression was one of utter indifference. His arms folded as he leaned lazily against the counter. The CEO hesitated, barely concealing the disgust curling in their chest. "She's struggling," they said evenly. "She's not our problem," Travis shot back. "You want to get paid to babysit, go work at a daycare." Something inside the CEO snapped. For days, they had watched the erosion of basic decency, the suffocating weight of neglect disguised as efficiency. They had swallowed their anger, forced themselves to listen, to understand. But this was the line. "I'll help her," they said, a warning edge to their voice. Travis scoffed. "Then you can do it on your own time, because if you waste another minute, you're off the clock." The CEO's hands clenched into fists. They forced a breath, but the rage remained. They turned to the woman, helping her lift the bag, scanning her items as efficiently as possible. The moment her transaction was complete, they turned back, expression unreadable. What kind of manager refuses to help people? Their voice was calm, too calm. Travis pushed off the counter with an incredulous laugh. "The kind that keeps this place from burning to the ground. You think this is keeping it running?" The air in the store shifted. Conversation slowed. Employees who had long since learned to keep their heads down now looked up, sensing something different in the air. Travis narrowed his eyes. "Watch it." But the CEO was done watching. "I've been here long enough to see the truth," they said, their voice steady. "This store isn't failing because of the employees. It's failing because of people like you. You don't lead. You don't support. You don't care." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Travis's face before it twisted into something uglier. He leaned in. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The words came without hesitation. "I'm the person who signs your paycheck." Silence. Travis's smirk faltered, his brow furrowing. A beat passed before he scoffed, shaking his head. "Yeah, right." The CEO reached into their pocket, pulling out their company ID, the one with their real name, their real title. They held it up just long enough for the reality to sink in. The blood drained from Travis's face. The employees around them froze, eyes darting between the badge and the man who had spent years treating them like disposable cogs in his machine. The shift in power was instantaneous, an unseen force rippling through the room. The CEO tucked the ID away, Their gaze locked onto Travis. "You've spent years abusing your authority," they said, their voice even but charged. "Ignoring problems. Dismissing concerns. You created a store where employees don't feel valued, where customers feel like an inconvenience." Travis opened his mouth, but no words came. "You're done here." A sharp inhale from one of the employees. A faint rustle as Elena, who had been watching from a distance, straightened her posture, eyes wide with something that looked almost like hope. Travis laughed, short, forced, an attempt to mask the panic beneath his skin. "You can't." "I can." The CEO's voice was final. "And I just did." The store was utterly silent. Every employee, every customer who had lingered, every cashier who had been too afraid to speak up, was now watching. Travis's face darkened. His hands curled into fists, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched. But he saw it. The truth. There was no getting out of this. Without another word, he ripped off his name badge, threw it onto the counter, and stormed past the stunned employees. The front doors swung open, then shut. And just like that, he was gone. The store remained suspended in a tense silence long after Travis had disappeared through the front doors. Employees exchanged uncertain glances, their expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and cautious hope. The CEO stood rooted in place, the weight of their revelation still settling in their own chest. There had been no elaborate speech, no long-winded justification. Just the truth, spoken plainly, with no room for denial. Elena was the first to move. She cleared her throat, shifting on her feet before stepping closer. "So what happens now?" The CEO turned to face her. "That depends," they said, scanning the faces of the employees who had spent years trapped under Travis's reign. "I need to know what you all need to make this place better." A murmur rippled through the group. Employees exchanged glances, their postures softening ever so slightly. They weren't used to being asked what they needed. For so long, they had worked under a system that viewed them as replaceable. Their concerns nothing more than background noise in a machine that prioritized efficiency over humanity. A younger cashier, Ben, hesitated before speaking. "For starters, we need actual support. When something breaks, when we're short-staffed, when customers get aggressive, half the time, there's no one to back us up." A few others nodded in agreement. "We're understaffed every shift," someone else added. "We're constantly covering for people who quit because they couldn't take it anymore." "And half the time, the schedules don't make sense," Elena chimed in. "People get assigned shifts they can't work, and if they speak up, they get written up." The CEO listened, absorbing every word. It was worse than they had imagined. The problems weren't just the result of one bad manager. They were systemic, ingrained in the way the company had been operating for years. "I hear you," they said finally, "and I won't pretend I can fix everything overnight, but I can promise that change is coming." Skepticism lingered in a few expressions. Words were easy. Promises had been made before, only to fade into nothing once the corporate spotlight moved elsewhere. The CEO exhaled, then did something they had never done before. They reached for an apron from behind the counter and slipped it over their head. "Today," they said, rolling up their sleeves, "we work together." A stunned pause. Then something shifted. A spark of something new, something long absent from the store. A tentative kind of trust. For the first time in years, the team wasn't operating under silent resentment. The CEO stocked shelves, helped customers, cleaned the break room. They worked side by side with the people they had once only seen as numbers on a spreadsheet. They learned their names, their frustrations, their quiet dreams of something better. Hours passed, and by the time the shift ended, exhaustion tugged at every muscle in their body. But it was a good exhaustion, a kind that came from effort, that actually meant something. As the last customers trickled out, the employees lingered near the registers. There was an unspoken question in the air, thick with uncertainty. The CEO wiped their hands on their apron before speaking. "This isn't just for show," they assured them. "Travis was a symptom, but the real problem goes deeper, and I won't walk away from it." Elena crossed her arms, studying them. "So what happens next?" "We rebuild," the CEO said simply. "New management, new policies, real accountability, and it starts now." The weight of those words settled over the group. Slowly, carefully, the tension in their shoulders eased. There was no instant forgiveness, no immediate erasure of years of mistreatment. But for the first time in a long time, there was hope. The CEO glanced around the store one last time. It wasn't just a business. It never had been. It was people, real, hard-working people, who deserved better. And they were going to make sure they got it.